Create Handmade, and welcome, super welcome to number 25. Subscriber number 25. You are fabulous, and so is everybody else. So this week, we're going to get into that project, the cat basket, made by crocheting some very thick yarn, or you can make yarn from the old rags, an old blanket or a new blanket, but an old blanket or fleece or something that's an old a thin mat or something, anything that could be feasibly knotted, basically. I started it last week and I said to anybody who was watching that if they wanted to go along with me this week, they could try. It's very basic. With a chunky little needle, some yarn, thick yarn, you can go a long way. So we can start the project, and I finished it actually on the same day, so I can show you that. And then I'm going to show you a little bit of an update on my fashion tweaks for my, here's all the putty tats that are coming in, recycled clothing and the upstyled clothing and that. I did a little fashion show for you. Hi, this is what you're going to come up with. So let's get started. About 1.5 inches from the side, start cutting away your strip. You can cut strips and tie them like me, like I do on my project, or you can just keep cutting in a big long spiral from the edges all the way into the center. Keep going around and around. This is going to speed up now in a second, but it'll give you an idea. About 1 inch from the side. You can trim off those little edges if you like later, but you don't have to. Depends on how you want it. So keep going around and around and around, as you see, until about 1 inch wide, 1.5 inches wide. It depends. You can decide yourself how fine, but if it's chunky, it can be very more, it'll hold its shape better. So I'd say go for chunky rather than thin. So about 1.5 inches, it's thereabouts. And then just roll it up. And on the edges, you see on the corners, you'll have maybe a little bit to trim off like that. And that's easy. So just trim it off and wrap it up, and look, you have a whole ball of yarn for your project. So now things get interesting. You make a little loop. Many of you will know how to crochet already. I'm not a crocheter as such, but I know the basics. I don't know what the stitches are called, so I'll just describe what I'm doing. You make a little knot, a little kind of a slip knot, and then that's it. That's your first stitch. You hold a long piece around the needle and out. It's a hook around the hook, around. You just hold the base and then out. It's just like making a chain. What you're trying to do now is make a chain so that it'll go around in a circle neatly without leaving a little hole in the center. So it just depends on your yarn and how tight you are doing your stitches. So you'll see now in a second, I'll show you. See, you just bring it around like that just to see, is it long enough to make a circle? And also not a circle with a hole in the center. You don't want a little hole. So it's just nice and tight, but that you're not pulling up the edges when you're doing it. Then you go into the last stitch, the top of the last stitch, and you bring the long piece around. Get rid of that extra bit to the back for the moment. That won't give you a problem later when it's it's far back in the stitching, but in around, and then you go around again, you pull the stitch through, and then you pull the other stitch over. Around, out, get you a little bit of, oh, see, I have to join these because these are remnants from the ends of blankets in a recycling centre that we got there a few years ago. So I just make a little knot and pull it through and tighten it. If you've done your blanket in strips, you'll have to do that as well. Now you won't have the little threads that I have there. I like to split those again, by the way, later, because I don't want the little paws getting stuck. But now off you go again. In the next stitch, around, out the first stitch, then around, out the first one, out the second one. Around. You're making an extra stitch. That's grand because you're on the loop now and you need to kind of move it on. So you had an extra stitch there before going into the next stitch. So in, around, out. You bring yarn around again, over the first one, over the second one. Now you make an extra loop to give it a little bit of distance so it'll go into the next stitch and won't be pulling too tight, but you're keeping it nice and firm. You don't want it loopy and holey because this is the base of your pet bed. So now it's tricky to know which stitch, but you'll get the gist in the end. I'll show you now. Go in, around. I'll explain better now in a second when you have a better view. And then in, around, all right. Out and out. It's the same over and over. Now an extra stitch. There is one. An extra loop. Now into the next hole. In there, around, out. Bring the yarn around. Out the first one. The second one goes over. And you take another extra stitch, and that's an extra loop made. Great. Now, I do that to see if it's pulling or not. So I kind of lean it up just to see where the stitch is going to land when it's joined on. And if it's pulling the edges up, I'll give it an extra stitch, even 2 stitches before I get going. So the plan is it's going to go around and around and around and around like that. And that's what you're going to get in the end. And you can determine the size of your cat basket by the width of your base. So go around for as long as you like. Do you see that, the way I put the needle straight up? It'll just tell me where that loop is going to join. You don't want it pulling across like that yet. You want it to go flush with, you want to keep it all flat. So you might have to give it an extra loop, like I was saying, to get to your next stitch so that doesn't pucker. You see now what I'm saying? So in you go again. Around, whoops, in there, around, through, grand, and then you go around again, bring it through, bring the other one over, and you make an extra stitch here. And there's another stitch going on. Am I going to do that? Not sure. Maybe not. We'll check. So if it's enough that you're not pulling, I do need an extra stitch there. Look, it was pulling from the edges. So in the next stitch, I hope you get the gist of this now. Round. See, it's the same as it was earlier. Now, 1, and I think I'm doing 2 at this stage, 2, because otherwise it's pulling too hard on the actual main piece. So now, whoops, that's covering over the stitches, but you will probably have the gist by now. And if you're a crochet woman, you're probably laughing at my vocabulary. Now, keep going, keep going. That's it, me just there trying to see if the stitches are pulling or not, but they weren't. So on we go, roundy, 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 roundy. And I'm just joining my bits of, you can join that all on at the beginning, and then you don't have to do all that joining in the middle of your project. But I want to just get on and move on with the project with the video, so I did. So there it is. It's going around and around like a little snail. And yeah, so there you are. So now, here we go. Another little join. This will be your blanket, 2 flat ends like that. If you have done it in strips, I mean, it's really nice to have those little snaggles. I like them. They're raggly taggly. So if you were really fussy, you could sew them and then you wouldn't have any. But I mean, that's a bit labour intensive. And the cats like to play with them. So that's another reason to leave them. So yeah, so here we are now. I've gone all the way around. Now we're going to bring up the sides. So it's the near part. See that near part? Not the outer part of the stitch where you were sewing or flipping, crocheting into. You go into the near loop on the flat. So it's the very next one, not the one directly under your stitch, not there, but the next one. And you want to keep it really tight for this row. So in, around, out there and out there. And you don't add a loop, you just go directly into the next loop on the circle. Now don't worry too much about making a mistake with this. It's very, very forgiving. And in, around, which I love about this project. There. You see that? And then that's it. You don't add an extra loop. You just go into the next loop there. Around, out, out. That's it. And then not there, right, directly under, but the next one, yes. Now, sometimes they differ. and it feels wrong to go into one stitch because it's pulling, or there's a loop where you don't want a loop. So you can, if it's pulling, you can just go into a nearer loop, a very near loop. And if it's too loopy, same thing. Now that's gone all the way around. And now you're going on to the next row. So the next row is going to start bringing up the sides now. So you're going into the inner loop again of that, your whole, you can see what I'm saying, the inner loop rather than the outer loop of the previous row. And the same again in, and this is going to be tight as well because you are, now this is a little bit, what am I going to say? It's a little bit challenging because you want it to be tight, but you don't want to have it pulling the sides all the way in. So you just keep it as tight as you can. If you feel you're getting too tight, that you're pulling the edges in so that they're leaning too hard, you can loosen up your stitch, or you could even give it an extra stitch before you go into the loop, the next loop, if it's getting really, really tight. So it's a little bit of a decision you have to make, but if it feels right, you'll know yourself, and it's very forgiving. So you can just decide, and you won't see it. It won't be visible in the finished project, especially if you have multicolored blankets like this, or, you know, multicolored yarn. And even if it wasn't, the cats are not going to care. It's going to be fine. So this is just a great way to make cat beds or dog beds. Now they're inside, they're for inside. You wouldn't use these outside because they would hold the moisture. But they are really cozy and lovely for inside beds. These ones happen to be made of wool, but if you have mixed material, that's going to work just fine. As long as there's little areas, and this has breathing holes and that, and they won't sweat or anything. It's really cozy and really nice, and they love these beds. So yeah, it's a really, really great way to use up old material or old bits. You see there now it builds up, the sides are building. Now you just decide how high you want that. If you want that high, you know, very high, go up a little bit higher. And if you want it, you don't need it that high, in fact, because just once they can snuggle into the side. At the end, if you keep going around and around, you can decide on the height. It's tricky to show you in here, but you can decide on the height. I have some images I'll show you either before or after this little shoot part, but just depends on how far you want to go, really. It hurts your hands, by the way. It dries your hands out, so use a bit of cream afterwards to kind of put the moisture back in. But it is so satisfying. I finished this off that day, then I started when I showed you on the video there. I finished it that night. I kept going. What else do I have to tell you? Just finishing it off. It's the same as tying a knot, and then keep a little bit of a strand and then weave it in and out amongst the other pieces, maybe on the inside, to tie it. I want to give you a little tip about, I must get rid of that. I haven't got rid of that. But I like these details. But what I do is, if they show up on the inside, I just push them through so that they're a feature of the outside, which is really sweet. You can see it against a clear background, but it's just a nice little addition. So what you can do is just tie your blanket or your rug in strips and tie each of them with one of those knots, the way I did mine. And then you end up with these knots, but you lose some of your blanket, so depends. And eventually when you've washed it a few times, it kind of calms down as well. It's not quite as exciting as this, but it is still quite a nice little feature. So yes, so there you go. If there's anything you want to ask me, just ask me in the comments. I'm finding it hard to put the vids together at the moment because they're kind of long-winded and kind of broken up. And I'm doing a bit of fashion in there too, which I think I'll separate eventually. But there you go. It's really cutie, isn't it? So I hope you enjoyed it this week. Thank you for watching again. Oh, and thank you so much to subscriber number 25. I'm really thrilled about that. I watch it all the time just to see. Whoa. And I know you're not supposed to be obsessed with subscribers, but I think at the start you kind of have a right to, because you're really trying to find out if anybody wants the content that you are creating. And if not, what kind of content do they want? that you can do. So I'm just interested to see who's interested and who's disinterested and what they're interested in, etc., etc. So please, please give me any comments or suggestions about things that you'd like to see happen. I'll probably develop it more and more and do obviously different projects, a bit of jewelry, a bit of this, a little bit more fashion upstyling tips, and that kind of thing. So yeah, good luck with your own things this week. Good luck with your stuff, and see you next week. I'm not entirely sure what's coming next week. I might be able to add it on at the end here.